How long do I have?
Class ends at 3.
Oh, okay. Drug testing until the 1950s or so was basically not possible, at least to detect the minute quantities that would often appear in urine to make any sense out of the data. Well, once chemical methods became available around that time, some of the sports federations began using drug testing to see if athletes were using agents. The Olympics started using the testing for amphetamines at the Mexico City Games in '68. Then, as you see there, the use of out-of-competition testing began to take hold about 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago. So until the early 80s, there was, some attempts to find out if athletes are in fact using drugs, using chemistry. But the methods were far from ideal. There were a lot of false positives, false negatives that were involved, but the situation began to change in the early 80s with the development of a technique called GC mass spec, where one combines gas chromatography with mass spectrometry, and one can detect with pretty good precision specific drug agents. Interesting how this came about. The technique was pretty much perfected by the early 80s, and its use in athletes was certainly feasible, although it wasn't used until the authorities decided to try it out by surprising the athletes at the Pan Am Games. I think they were in Bogota, if my memory serves me, Colombia, in 1983. This was a total surprise to everybody. The sports federations, it was a well-kept secret that this was going to be done. The sports federations, which sponsored many of the athletes, were not aware of it, and certainly the athletes weren't aware of it. But as athletes started to arrive for the Pan Am Games, they were being asked for urine samples. And the results were being provided to them almost immediately, within a few hours. And they'd say, here, we know that you took this drug. How did you know that? Well, we have our ways. So the use of GC mass spec took everybody by surprise. In fact, when the word started getting out, hey, they know what I took, a lot of the athletes didn't even bother to participate. They went home because they knew what the result would be. And this was, in a sense, a great success because they were able to determine specifically what specific athletes took and being able to report that to them. And everything changed after that. GC mass spec became the gold standard for determining the presence of drugs in urine right after that. Today, we not only use GC mass spec, but also methods for detecting peptides like ELISA, immunoassays. So one can detect peptides, proteins. It can determine the structure of the protein and the peptide. So you know if somebody's been using an analog of growth hormone, for example, you can tell exactly which analog they're using. Things have gotten very sophisticated over the years. But that doesn't stop athletes from trying. They still do it. They still try to test the system in spite of that. Well, the availability of sophisticated testing techniques to determine if athletes are taking drugs was one thing. The other thing was, how do you enforce it? You can say, okay, we find this drug, you're out of competition. So you go home, and they'll try another venue to use. There was no coordination among sports federations. They didn't see a need to do that. The track and field federations, they didn't care what the people in the skiing federations, for example, did. But they didn't realize that they all had a stake in the game. And this pertained until 1998, actually 99. There was a lot of stuff that was going on in the 80s and 90s. There was a lot of cover-ups. In fact, there was a member of the U.S. Olympic Committee who wrote a book, a damning book, on the USOC and all the cover-ups that they had been party to. Athlete, and names were named, people as prominent as Carl Lewis. This person accused the USOC of covering up the use of their elite athletes of drugs, even though tests came back positive, and everybody knew it. Cover-up you couldn't prevent. Well, the whole thing came to a head in the Tour de France. There we go again. Notice the yellow color. I don't know what it is about the Tour de France. But, a team from Italy that represented the Festina watch company and became known as the Festina Affair. That was the event that changed everything. And it happened innocently enough, put that in quotation marks, when the night before the Tour de France was to begin in '98, the trainer for the Festina team was stopped on a traffic violation in France. And the policeman who stopped him decided to search the car. And on searching the car, he found a whole, I guess you'd call it, mother lode of drugs. Everything you can imagine. Amphetamines, EPO, human growth hormone, steroids, the whole gamish. I mean, it was all there. And of course, the policeman reported it to the authorities, and the race went on. But after the race, people started to get wise. The people who should have been wise to begin with started to realize that we all have a stake in this. It doesn't matter what our sport is. We all have a stake in this because the credibility of competition is at stake here. If athletes can get away with this impunitively, I guess that's a word, where they're going to stop?